Welcome to Sunday morning at First Presbyterian Church. I'm Pastor Dieth, and in response to the events of the amazing resurrection at Easter, it now becomes our job to discern how we respond to the events of Holy Week and Christ being raised from the dead. We are to discern how we are being led to live, to change our lives, to care for others, to welcome others to Christ's table. This is our call and our challenge. Let's do this together. Come on in.
Our first lesson this morning is taken from the book of Esther, the fourth book, verses 1 through 8. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hatak, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. Hatak went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king to make supplication to him and entreat him for her people. This is the word of the Lord.
Our second lesson is continuing that bit of Esther that Alice started and lifted up. Let's continue. Esther 4, 9 through 17. Listen for the word of the Lord. Hatak went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and gave him a message for Mordecai, saying, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, is but one law. All alike are to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone, may that person live. I myself have not been called to come to the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat or drink for 3 days or night. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So this story today, a great story to tell. It is filled with intrigue, palace intrigue, those who were working behind the scenes to manipulate the king. It is about drunken debauchery. It is about beauty. It is about the survival of the Jews that is at risk. The other way of saying that is that they may very well have been wiped out, a genocide, depending on what happened in this story. So let's take a look back and put the pieces together. You've heard a little bit of the bits and pieces. So Esther is in Persia. So in 586 BC, the Babylonians came in, Nebuchadnezzar, and took over Israel, and the exiles went there. They took the most desirable exiles, and they were there. But they all didn't just go there. Many went to other places around that part of the world, and Persia was one of them. Esther talks about there being 127 different provinces in Persia at that time, and most of them contained Jews to some degree. And so there was a large number who didn't go to Babylon, who were still out there, and that's who Esther is. So in this time, they are in a pagan land in Persia. There are just a couple of characters. First, there's the king and queen. Ahasuerus, say Ahasuerus. He's the king. He is pretty much manipulated all the way through and or drunk all the way through. They have festivals. The story begins with a 7-day celebration saturated with wine. And that happens several times throughout the book of Esther. It's not very big. You can go home and read it this afternoon. Do that. So it begins there, and there's his queen, Vashti. She is only in the first chapter. She's dismissed very early, and we should give her more credit. On day 7 of spring break in the palace of Ahasuerus, he is more than 3. He is 6, 9, 12 sheets to the wind. And he is saying to all of those gathered, my queen is hot. I mean, she is really pretty. You want to see her? That's exactly the quote. It's not. And so he sends others to get Queen Vashti and say, the king wants you to put your crown on and come show them how beautiful you are. And she doesn't like that. She stands up to the king, which was ridiculous and unheard of. And in doing some more research, rabbis, it doesn't say it in the story, but some rabbis think that he called her to come naked. Crown. So for whatever reason, she stands up and says, I will not. She stands up to the king knowing it could be her life. She says, no, I'm not your trained monkey. I'm not doing that for you. I'm not coming to your party to stand there so you can ogle me with your drunken friends. So Ahasuerus gets mad and they figure out what can we do? We can't let this stand or all of the women will start saying no to all of the men. That's in there. And so they decide to banish her and boom, she's gone. I'm going to give her a little more credit for that little moment in time. So it leaves an opening for Ahasuerus to find a queen. And so these 127 provinces, the word goes out, a beauty pageant will be held. Last week, remember, we were talking about David. And Samuel went to Jesse, his father, went through all the 7 sons before, well, who is it? Wait, he's not here. What, little David with the shepherd with the sheep. And just like here, they presented themselves for their good looks and their stature, bathing suit competition, talent competition, they did all the things. And it is even more so in this case. It is a pure beauty contest. Doesn't matter who she is, where she's from, the prettiest is going to win. And that's what happens. Esther is that woman who was chosen. Now, who is Mordecai then to Esther? We think a cousin, often she's referred to as an uncle. Either way, Esther was an orphan and Mordecai raised her. So very much a father figure to her. And so Esther is chosen, which brings Mordecai closer to that arena of the monarchy. And Mordecai, at one point, overhears a few of the eunuchs in employ of the monarchy talking about killing Ahasuerus, the king. Because he's a good guy, he goes and he tells the king and has those palace servants killed, but that puts Mordecai in a positive light for the king. Then Haman, boo. Haman was the trusted advisor to King Ahasuerus, who was manipulating the king because apparently it was easy. So he obtained status as the chief advisor to the king. And as such, everyone was supposed to bow to him as well as the king. So one day, Haman and Mordecai crossing in the street, everybody's bowing. Mordecai does not bow to Haman. Haman gets enraged and says, I need to take this guy out. And not only him, but all of his Jewish people, because they live different, because their laws are different from ours, all of them cannot disobey the rules of the empire of the monarchy. So Haman goes and talks to the king and says, this is what happened in very vague terms, doesn't say it was Mordecai, because again, the king liked Mordecai because he saved his life. But convinces the king that not only should he wipe out this transgressor who didn't bow, but the entire Jewish race within the Persian Empire. I don't compare people to Hitler very often. Too many people do in our political discourse and in the world, but this is that. Very Hitler-esque. Genocide, he is wanting to wipe out all of these people because Mordecai did not bow to him, giving respect. So Ahasuerus, yeah, whatever, here's my ring, here's my signet, my seal, do whatever you want. And so Haman does. He casts lots on when to do it. That is rolling the dice. That's really what Purim means, casting lots, to find the date when they should all be exterminated. Sends out letters, all those 127 provinces. Here's the day, get ready. And when Mordecai hears, he tears his clothes, kind of rent, all of those things that we hear in the Old Testament, our Hebrew friends, when they are mourning, when something terrible happens. He doesn't know how to respond to this. And then there's Esther. Esther, who Vicky said already, did not disclose that she was Jewish or of Jewish heritage. She is living in a land among pagans, herself not practicing, but yet connected. And so Mordecai says, they're going to wipe our people out. You have some power and some opportunity. And she's terrified because this would mean she has to go to the king. Nobody just goes to the king. You have to be called by the king. If you go to the king, you could be put to death if the king wishes. This was her very life at risk. And so, as in the passage today, she says, if I perish, I perish. After Mordecai says, perhaps you have been placed here for a time such as this. That quote, that is more familiar than others in Esther. So, knowing her husband, the king, she just goes and she shows up. Again, not knowing, but the king, 3, 6, 12 sheets to the wind, says, what can I do for you, my lovely queen? And he says, you know what? Esther says, I'd like you and Haman to come and let me throw you a banquet tonight. And it's there that she plans to tell Ahasuerus what Haman has done. So the king says, fine, great, let's go. Haman's all excited because the king and the queen have invited just him to have dinner. Very excited. Banquet goes, everybody's happy. Queen Esther can't get herself to the point where she tells the king of what Haman is doing. And so she says, King, come back tomorrow night and I will have another banquet for you and for Haman. King says, great, I'm in. So it's the second feast where she comes. And at this point, the king says, what can I do for you, Esther? I'll give you anything, even half of my kingdom. You're great. Love you. You're pretty. And Esther says, please don't kill me and don't kill my people, for your decrees are going to wipe out all of us, including me. Paraphrasing. And the king says, what are you talking about? She said, I am Jewish and my people are Jewish, and this is the law that was put into effect. And she says, who did this? The king says, who did this? And she said, Haman. King gets mad. Haman had constructed gallows from which to hang Mordecai. And the king said, take him out and hang him on the gallows. Killed him. Gone. So as we look at this story and the people in it, there's a couple of things for us to glean. Who are we in the story? We've got Vashti, who stood up, was not going to be manipulated, was not going to be exploited. She, like Esther, risked her life to stand up and say no. There's King Ahasuerus, who spent most of his life in a drunken blur, distracting himself from the hard work of life. He didn't care about the administration. He didn't care about the details. He was king. Can we and do we live sometimes distracting ourselves away from difficult times and places because we have the relative comfort to do so? Do we seem to saturate ourselves with things that do not feed us because we can, like he did? Are we as easily manipulated, say it that way, just as he was, because he didn't care about things that did not affect him directly? Are we him? Mordecai, great kind of grandfatherly role here, but also strong in his faith. He would not bow to Haman. He would not worship idols. He would not recognize Haman. There are some other reasons for that. But he stood up to face his own possible death. He cared and reached out to Esther when she was a child, when she was orphaned. Do we reach out to others who are in need and help them like Mordecai did? And have we taken a stand on our faith the way that Mordecai did? There is Haman, obviously, who is only in it for himself. All he wants is status and power. He manipulates those around him. He is the personification of evil and sin in this world, in this story. Sometimes we fit that bill as well, as far as the self-centered pieces, as far as only being concerned about ourselves and what we can gain at any cost. And then there's Esther, who didn't really live her life as a Jew, but that's her people and her history. She so easily conformed to the pagan culture around her that no one knew she was a Jew. Are we the same? Have we so conformed to our secular culture that people don't know that we're Christians? Can they tell? Have you talked to them? Have you showed them? But then she stood. She knew the power that she wielded, and she did just that. Each of us has power as well to use as gifts that God has given us. Will we claim it? Have we claimed it? Will we use it? A story about a police chief that got a call that said that somebody in the local lake had drowned, which was surprising to the officer because the lake was only 5 feet deep at its deepest point. So the officer assumed it was a child or a short adult. When he got there, realized that the deceased man was 6 feet tall, drowned in 5 feet of water. And he thought, if the man had just stood, if he had just planted his feet and stood up, he would have lived. Esther was splashing. So too were the Jewish people. She stood and rose and said, if I perish, I perish. Now, I hope we're not being called to make that same if I perish, I perish situation. Sometimes our military friends indeed do that, and we thank them for their service. But for us, the call is to look at Esther and to stand the way that she did, to do what she knew was right by the God of her people. Will you stand? Her call came through that moment in the monarchy. Mordecai said, perhaps you were there for a time such as this. Each of you and me and this church and this community and this world and body of Christ are placed here in this time in 2024 for a time such as this. Will you stand? Will you stand?